She was the beggar no one saw until the billionaire chose her as his wife, never realizing the secret she carried would shatter his world. The chandeliers of the Grandview Hotel ballroom dripped crystal light across the marble floors, scattering golden reflections over gowns worth small fortunes and tuxedos tailored to perfection. Laughter rose and fell like music, champagne glasses clinked, and the city's most powerful moved through the space as though it belonged to them alone. Nathaniel Hayes stood near the towering windows, a glass of scotch in his hand, surveying the glittering scene with the same cool detachment he used when assessing a quarterly report. At 35, he had built Hayes Industries from nothing into a multinational empire, and though his presence commanded respect, there was an edge to him, a distance that kept others cautious. His steel-gray eyes rarely softened, his jawline was always set, and he had the air of a man accustomed to control. The hum of polite conversation shifted as Vanessa Knight entered the circle around him, platinum hair coiled into an elegant updo, a designer gown hugging her every calculated curve. She moved like a predator among prey. Her smile was dazzling, but it carried venom, the kind Nathaniel knew well. She had broken their engagement 6 months earlier, announcing he was incapable of love, too consumed by ambition to see anyone as more than a stepping stone. Tonight, she looked determined to prove her point again. Well, well, Vanessa purred, her voice carrying far enough to draw curious glances. Still playing the lone wolf, Nathaniel? Some things never change. Roland Pierce, Nathaniel's oldest friend and the only man who could read the storm beneath his polished exterior, stiffened at his side. But Nathaniel's expression didn't waver. He simply tilted his glass and met Vanessa's sharp gaze with practiced calm. Selective, Roland interjected smoothly, trying to diffuse the moment. Nathaniel's always believed in quality over quantity. Vanessa's laugh rang out like breaking glass. Quality, she repeated, eyes glinting. That's amusing. Everyone knows Nathaniel Hayes only associates with people who can benefit his empire. He wouldn't recognize genuine emotion if it stood right in front of him. The small crowd of socialites leaned in, hungry for spectacle. Phones slipped out of clutches like eager weapons, their cameras ready. Nathaniel felt the weight of every stare, the gleam of anticipation in every eye. Vanessa was baiting him, and she knew it. I suppose that's your expert opinion, Nathaniel said finally, his voice as calm as a winter lake, considering how well you understood mine during our engagement. Oh, please, Vanessa waved a manicured hand, her smile sharpening. You're obsessed with control, with perfection. You could never truly connect with anyone who didn't meet your impossible standards. You'd probably marry a complete stranger just to prove some twisted point about your superiority. Her words dropped like a gauntlet. Roland inhaled sharply, recognizing the danger in the glint that flickered across Nathaniel's eyes. But it was too late. Is that a challenge? Nathaniel asked quietly, every syllable precise. If you want to call it that. Vanessa's lips curved wider. $10 million to the charity of my choice if you can't do it. Find someone completely outside your precious social circle. No money, no connections, no beauty by society's shallow standards. Make it last 1 month. Fail, and the world will see the truth I already know. The ballroom's chatter evaporated. The bet hung in the air, electric. Nathaniel set down his glass, his pride ignited by the scorn in Vanessa's eyes and the whispered thrill spreading through the onlookers. How much? His tone was deceptively soft. 10 million. And if I succeed? Her smile gleamed like a knife. 20 million to your charity of choice, and a public admission that I misjudged your capacity for feeling. Roland gripped Nathaniel's arm, his voice low and urgent. Nathaniel, don't. She's goading you. This is insanity. But Nathaniel's gaze never left Vanessa. A storm was building in him. Wounded pride, defiance, and something deeper, darker. Deal, he said. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. Phones lit up, recording the exact moment one of the most powerful men in New York put his reputation, his pride, and his future on the line. 1 month from tonight, Nathaniel continued, his voice carrying through the shocked silence, I'll introduce you to my wife. The room erupted in whispers, cameras flashing like lightning, already eager to carry the scandal into headlines by morning. Vanessa's smile widened, triumphant, but behind it was the faintest flicker of surprise. Nathaniel Hayes had taken her bait, and no one yet knew how far he was willing to go to win. The city looked different when Nathaniel Hayes wasn't staring down at it from his glass-walled penthouse or the boardroom of Hayes Tower. The noise was raw, the air heavier, and the streets grittier than anything his chauffeured town cars usually touched. That morning, he walked among it in jeans and a sweater, a baseball cap pulled low, his steel-gray eyes narrowed against the chill. Roland Pierce trudged beside him, muttering curses under his breath every few blocks, his sandy hair mussed in exasperation. "This is lunacy," Roland said for the 10th time. "You've built an empire by making rational choices, and now you're wandering around the city like some bargain hunter for brides, to prove a point to Vanessa, of all people." Nathaniel kept walking, scanning the sidewalks, the bus stops, the shadowed corners of the park. "This isn't about Vanessa anymore," Isabel says. Aide quietly. "This is about me." "Really?" Roland shot back. "Because it looks a lot like Pride dressed up in Armani. You think you can pluck some stranger off the streets and parade her in front of the city's elite like a trophy? Do you have any idea how badly this could blow up in your face?" Nathaniel didn't answer. The truth was, Roland wasn't entirely wrong. His pride had been bruised, but beneath that bruised pride was something else. A gnawing need to prove that Vanessa didn't know him as well as she thought. That he wasn't hollow inside. That he could, in fact, build something real, even if he had to manufacture it under impossible circumstances. 3 hours passed and frustration began to creep into his bones. The women they approached either laughed in disbelief, walked away in fear, or worse, recognized him despite his disguise and demanded answers. He began to think Roland's warnings might be right, that this plan was a doomed spectacle waiting to humiliate him, when they turned a corner near Central Park. And that was when he saw her. She sat on a worn blanket pressed against the iron fence, a small cardboard sign propped beside her that read in neat block letters, "Anything helps." A battered paperback rested in her hands, its spine cracked, its pages yellowed from use. Her auburn hair tumbled around her shoulders, tangled and dull, but not without a certain luster when it caught the weak sunlight. Her glasses were too large, one lens cracked, obscuring much of her face, but Nathaniel caught a flash of her eyes as she turned a page. Green, startlingly bright, filled not with desperation, but with a strange, stubborn fire. "Don't even think about it," Roland hissed, noticing the way Nathaniel slowed. But Nathaniel's feet were already moving. She noticed him approaching and snapped the book shut, her body tense. "I'm not looking for any trouble," she said, her voice carrying a soft, lilting accent he couldn't quite place. She tugged her coat tighter, though the fabric was thin and frayed. "Neither am I," Nathaniel replied, crouching down so he wasn't towering over her. Up close, he noticed the dirt smudges on her cheek, the threadbare gloves missing their fingertips. But he also noticed the fine structure of her features, the way she held herself with dignity even in the most undignified circumstances. "I have an unusual proposition." Her green eyes narrowed. Men in suits always have propositions. They usually end badly. Roland groaned behind him. "For God's sake, Nathaniel, you're going to get us both killed. Let's go." But Nathaniel didn't move. "Just hear me out," he said, his voice steady, controlled. "I need a wife, immediately." The words landed like a slap. She blinked, her lips parting in disbelief. For a moment he thought she might laugh, but instead she studied his face, too clean, too sharp, too clearly out of place on these streets. "You're insane," she said finally, her voice a whisper. "Possibly," Nathaniel admitted, "but I'll make it worth your while. $50,000 for 1 month of marriage. You'll have a roof over your head, clothes, food, and safety. At the end of the month we part ways and you keep the money. No strings." Roland choked. "Nathaniel, 50,000? The woman repeated softly, as if testing the words on her tongue. "And full room and board," Nathaniel pressed, sensing her hesitation. "A new wardrobe, medical care, a fresh start when it's all over." Silence stretched between them. Her hands tightened around her book as though it were the only anchor in her life. She thought of the nights she'd shivered under bridges, of the stares that treated her like less than human, of the gnawing hunger that never seemed to fade. 50,000 wasn't just money. It was an escape, a chance to claw her way out of the hole she'd been buried in. But her voice, when it came, was cautious. "This isn't some kind of joke? Yo, you aren't filming me?" Nathaniel's gray eyes met hers without flinching. "No joke. I'm completely serious. And I need an answer." Roland shifted anxiously, muttering, say no, for all our sakes." The woman's gaze darted between them. Nathaniel's intensity unsettled her, but there was something else there, something oddly sincere beneath the arrogance, something that made her pulse quicken with possibility and danger in equal measure. Her lips parted, and after a long pause that seemed to stretch on forever, she said it. 1 month, she whispered. 1 month. Nathaniel confirmed, his jaw tightening as though sealing a contract. And though neither of them knew it yet, that single agreement would ignite a firestorm that would consume both their lives and everyone watching from the sidelines. The bridal boutique smelled faintly of roses and silk, a world so alien from the damp subway tunnels and park benches Celeste had called home that she felt as if she'd stepped into another universe. Mirrors lined the walls, reflecting her image back at her from every angle, but it wasn't an image she recognized. The woman in the mirror wore a simple ivory gown that shimmered under soft lights, her auburn hair washed, cut, and pinned into an elegant updo that revealed the graceful line of her neck. Contact lenses had replaced her cracked glasses, and her green eyes, once dulled by exhaustion, now blazed like emeralds. Celeste's fingers trembled as she touched the fabric of the dress, her throat tightening. She should have felt triumphant. After all, she was about to step out of poverty into a life she hadn't dared to dream about, but all she felt was a gnawing unease. "You look beautiful," said Margaret, the boutique owner, fussing with the hem. "Your fiancé is a lucky man." Celeste forced a polite smile. A lucky man? No, this was no love story. It was a transaction, a one-month arrangement sealed by desperation and pride. And yet, as her reflection stared back at her, she couldn't help but imagine, just for a heartbeat, what it would be like if this were real. If the man waiting at the courthouse wasn't a billionaire making a reckless bet, but someone who wanted her for herself. Outside, Nathaniel adjusted his cufflinks impatiently. He had never been late to a business deal in his life, and this was no different, he told himself. A contract, nothing more. But when Celeste stepped out of the boutique, all thoughts of business evaporated. For the first time in years, his composure faltered. Roland, standing beside him, actually stopped mid-sentence. The transformation was staggering, not just the gown or the hair, but the way she carried herself. There was an innate grace there, a regal air that no stylist could manufacture. "Ready?" Nathaniel asked, his voice quieter than he intended. "Ready," Celeste replied, though her heart pounded so loudly she wondered if he could hear it. The courthouse ceremony was brisk, the judge efficient and detached, yet every word of the vows seemed to echo with weight. When Nathaniel slipped the gold band onto her finger, his hand shook ever so slightly. When their lips touched in the traditional kiss, it was supposed to be an act for appearances, but the spark that passed between them was undeniable, both of them startled by it. They signed the marriage certificate, and just like that, they were husband and wife. But the real strangeness began that night. The elevator swept them upward into the clouds, depositing them in the penthouse, an entire floor of glass, marble, and quiet luxury. Celeste stood in awe, her wedding dress pooling around her feet, staring at a view that seemed to stretch forever. She had gone from begging for spare change on a street corner to this in less than a week. The shift was dizzying, almost unreal. Nathaniel's voice broke the silence. "The guest suite is prepared for you. You'll have complete privacy." His tone was polite, almost businesslike, but there was something underneath it, a carefulness she hadn't expected. "Thank you," Celeste said softly, not knowing what else to offer. Gratitude felt too small for what had just transpired, yet honesty felt too dangerous. They shared a glass of wine in the living room, the city glittering behind them. Celeste curled into one end of the vast leather sofa, clutching the stem of her glass as if it could anchor her. Nathaniel sat across from her, his jacket discarded, his tie loosened. For once, he looked less like the untouchable titan of industry and more like a man, tired, contemplative, human. She studied him carefully. Why would a man like this risk everything for a bet? Why choose her, out of all the women in the city? And why, despite the transactional nature of their arrangement, had he been so strangely considerate? "Can I ask you something?" she ventured. He nodded. "This bet with your ex-fiancé, it means more to you than just money, doesn't it?" Nathaniel swirled his wine, the amber liquid catching the light. "Vanessa has a talent for finding weaknesses. She said I was incapable of love, that I couldn't form a real connection if my life depended on it. Maybe I just wanted to prove her wrong." Celeste's chest tightened. "By marrying a homeless woman?" His gaze snapped to hers, and for a moment she thought she'd gone too far. But then his expression softened. "I realize how that sounds, and I'm not proud of the circumstances, but you were different." Her pulse quickened, an unease creeping through her. Different, yes, too different, because he didn't know who she truly was, the secret she'd buried, the identity she'd abandoned, the truth that would shatter everything between them. She stood abruptly, pacing toward the window, the lights of Manhattan blurring beyond the glass. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice trembling. Nathaniel set his glass down, watching her intently. What is it? Celeste turned, her eyes luminous in the soft glow of the room. She took a deep breath as if preparing to rip open a wound. My name isn't Celeste Morgan. That's the name I've been using since I disappeared. Nathaniel frowned. Disappeared? Her voice broke, but she pressed on. My real name is Celeste Ashworth. The glass slipped from Nathaniel's hand and shattered on the floor. He stared at her, stunned. Ashworth, as in Ashworth Industries, as in the dynasty that had crumbled after the patriarch's death, leaving billions in limbo because the heir had vanished. You're supposed to be dead, Nathaniel said hoarsely. Celeste's eyes gleamed with pain and defiance. Disappeared. There's a difference. And in that instant, the fragile line between business arrangement and explosive truth snapped, leaving both of them standing at the edge of something far more dangerous than either had bargained for. The limousine glided smoothly up the steps of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, its sleek black frame catching the flashes of waiting cameras like a mirror. Outside, reporters pressed against velvet ropes, shouting questions, their voices rising over the din of the New York night. Celeste could feel her heart hammering against her ribs as she peered out the tinted glass. For 6 months she had been invisible, blending into alleys and park benches, dismissed by the world as nothing more than a shadow. Now, with one twist of fate and a ring on her finger, she was about to step directly into the brightest spotlight in the city. Beside her, Nathaniel adjusted his cufflinks with mechanical precision, though she noticed the faint tension in his jaw. His calm exterior was legendary, the face of a man who never faltered under pressure, but tonight he was something else. Protective, watchful, every move calculated to shield her from what was coming. Second thoughts? He asked quietly, his voice just low enough that only she could hear. Celeste forced a breath. About 100 of them. Nathaniel's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. He reached over, threading his fingers through hers. His touch was firm, steadying. Whatever happens, we face it together. That was the deal, remember? She nodded, though in her chest it no longer felt like a deal. It felt like something far more dangerous and far more fragile. The chauffeur opened the door, flashes exploded like lightning. Nathaniel stepped out first, shoulders squared, the perfect image of the city's most eligible billionaire. Then he extended his hand for her. Celeste placed hers into his, her emerald gown shimmering as she emerged into the chaos. The photographers roared, their lenses trained on her every movement. Who is she, Nathaniel? One shouted. How long have you been married? Another pressed. Mrs. Hayes, where did you come from? Celeste smiled the way her grandfather had taught her, gracious but unreadable. Years of etiquette lessons came rushing back, hidden muscle memory from a life she had sworn never to claim again. She kept her chin high, her movements fluid, and for the first time, she did not feel like an imposter. She felt like she belonged. Inside, the museum's grand hall had been transformed into a ballroom of living art. Thousands of flowers draped over marble columns, candlelight flickering across centuries-old sculptures. The city's elite filled the space, their laughter blending with the low hum of a string quartet. But all eyes turned when Nathaniel and Celeste entered. Whispers darted through the room like quicksilver. Vanessa Knight glided toward them before they had taken 10 steps. Her gown was black satin, fitted like armor, and her smile was sharper than any blade. Nathaniel, darling, she purred, every syllable dripping with false sweetness. Her gaze slid to Celeste, appraising, dissecting. And this must be your wife. How wonderfully unexpected. Vanessa, Nathaniel said coolly, his arm tightening around Celeste's waist. Allow me to introduce Celeste Hayes. Celeste extended her hand, steady despite the firestorm behind her ribs. Charmed, I'm sure. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. You look familiar. Have we met? I don't believe so, Celeste replied smoothly, meeting her stare without flinching. For a moment, their gazes locked, two predators circling. Vanessa's smile faltered just briefly before she turned away with a silken laugh. Well, I'm sure it will come to me eventually. The night wore on in a whirl of introductions. Business magnates, senators, heiresses, all eager to meet the woman bold enough to marry Nathaniel Hayes in secrecy. Celeste handled each one with grace that surprised even herself, discussing art, politics, philanthropy with ease. And with every passing moment, Nathaniel found himself watching her, not as a man completing a transaction, but as a partner, one who belonged at his side. But the triumph was short-lived. Roland appeared suddenly, his usual easy smile gone, his expression tight. He leaned close to Nathaniel, his voice low. We have a problem. Vanessa's been asking questions, deep ones. She's talking to someone from the Times. I think she knows. Nathaniel's jaw clenched. How much time? Not long, hours, maybe minutes. She's already connected Celeste to the streets. The Ashworth link won't be far behind. Before they could respond, the sharp chime of crystal on glass cut through the hall. Vanessa stood on the small stage, a champagne flute in her hand, her gown glistening under the lights, her voice carried, smooth and commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her smile gleaming, "I have the most fascinating news about tonight's guest of honor." The room fell silent. Celeste's blood turned to ice. Nathaniel's hand closed over hers, anchoring her, but she could feel the tremor in his grip. "Many of you have been curious about Mr. Hayes' mysterious new bride," Vanessa continued, drawing out every word. "Well, allow me to solve the mystery. Her name is Celeste Ashworth, the missing heiress presumed dead for over a year. And where has she been hiding? On the streets of New York, living as a beggar." A collective gasp tore through the ballroom. Heads whipped toward Celeste, eyes wide with shock, curiosity, judgment. The whispers began instantly, sharp, slicing, merciless. Vanessa's smile widened, her voice dripping with false pity. "A woman who appears just in time for her inheritance deadline, and conveniently marries one of the country's most powerful men. What remarkable timing, don't you think?" The silence that followed was suffocating, charged with accusation. Celeste's throat tightened, shame and fury colliding in her chest. For a moment, she felt herself slipping back to the streets, small, invisible, powerless. But then Nathaniel stepped forward. His voice, calm and resonant, cut through the noise like a blade. "Thank you, Vanessa, for that introduction," he said, every word deliberate. He turned, taking Celeste's hand, helping her onto the stage. His presence beside her was steady, unwavering. "Since our story is now public, perhaps it's time I told it myself." The room hung on his words. Even Vanessa's smile faltered as Nathaniel looked out over the glittering sea of faces and began to speak. "Our marriage began as something unconventional," he admitted. "Yes, it started with a bet, but what it has become is something neither of us expected." He turned to Celeste, his voice softening, unguarded. "I married a woman I thought was a stranger. Instead, I found someone with more strength, dignity, and courage than anyone in this room could imagine. She chose independence over comfort, pride over wealth, and she has taught me that love isn't about perfection, it's about truth." The silence was absolute. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a single pair of hands began to clap. Another joined, and another, until the entire hall thundered with applause. Celeste blinked, tears burning her eyes as she looked at Nathaniel. In that moment, she realized he wasn't just defending her. He was standing beside her, not as part of a bet, not as a contract, but as something real. And yet, beneath the applause, she could feel Vanessa's gaze burning into her like a promise. This was not over. Not by a long shot. The headlines the next morning were merciless. From Beggar to Billionaire Bride, the Celeste Ashworth scandal. Hayes' sham marriage, Heiress returns under cloud of suspicion. Love story or corporate scheme? Every paper, every channel, every gossip blog devoured their names. Nathaniel and Celeste became a modern-day fairy tale and a controversy. The applause at the gala had bought them a few hours of public sympathy, but it wasn't long before vultures circled. By the end of the week, 3 separate law firms had filed motions contesting Celeste's inheritance. Their argument was simple and venomous. The marriage was fraudulent, orchestrated to secure Ashworth wealth. Anonymous sources whispered to reporters, fueling the storm. And somewhere behind it all, Vanessa's shadow loomed. Nathaniel's office became their war room. Papers sprawled across mahogany tables, legal briefs stacked in teetering towers. Roland paced with a phone to his ear, barking updates, while Nathaniel stood at the window, his hands locked behind his back, steel gray eyes fixed on the skyline like it was an enemy he could outstare. Celeste sat across the table, silent, her fingers wrapped around a cup of untouched coffee. She had faced hunger, cold, and humiliation, but nothing felt as suffocating as this. Strangers tearing apart her life, calling her a fraud, questioning her sanity. "They'll push for a character assassination," Roland warned, hanging up. "They're already pulling footage of you on the streets, Celeste. Every photo, every police report from when you were sleeping in parks. They want to paint you as unstable, irresponsible, someone unfit to inherit a $60 billion empire." Celeste's jaw tightened. "My grandfather's will was clear. I inherit if I'm married and capable of running what's left of the company. They're afraid because they profited when Ashworth Industries was broken apart. If I take control, they lose everything. Nathaniel turned from the window, his voice quiet but edged with steel. Then we fight. We don't run from this. We make them regret coming after you. His words struck something deep in her, something she hadn't realized she needed. Solidarity. For months she had survived alone. Now, Nathaniel wasn't just standing beside her, he was declaring her battles his own. But the courtroom was another world entirely. The first day, the gallery was packed. Reporters, rival heirs, curious onlookers, all craning for a glimpse of the heiress who'd fallen into poverty and re-emerged in silk gowns. Cameras flashed outside, and every time Celeste stepped through those courthouse doors, she could feel the eyes judging, dissecting, condemning. Opposing counsel wasted no time. They painted her as opportunistic, claiming she had tricked Nathaniel into marriage for money. They implied she was mentally unfit, parading photographs of her in ragged clothes, asleep on subway benches. They even hinted at fabricated criminal connections, desperate to bury her credibility under mud. Through it all, Nathaniel never flinched. He sat beside her, his presence unshakable, every movement radiating the same message. You are not alone. When her hands trembled under the table, his steadied them. When her voice faltered in whispered testimony prep, his reassured. But the battles weren't only fought in the courtroom. At night, in the penthouse, exhaustion pressed on them both. Celeste would find herself staring out the vast windows, her reflection mingling with the city lights. The truth she had once hidden, the truth that had once felt like a curse, was now a weapon being used against her. And yet, in the stillness, she found Nathaniel watching her, the mask of the ruthless tycoon stripped away. One evening, after a particularly brutal day in court where opposing lawyers had all but called her marriage a scam, Celeste sank onto the sofa, her composure cracking. Maybe they're right, she whispered, her voice raw. Maybe this was never real. Maybe I should take the settlement and disappear again. Nathaniel dropped the file in his hands, crossing the room in 3 long strides. He crouched in front of her, taking her face in his hands. Don't you dare say that. Don't you dare believe them. His voice trembled with uncharacteristic passion. You walked away from an empire once because you refused to be controlled. That wasn't weakness, Celeste. That was strength. The kind of strength these parasites will never understand, and I'll be damned if I let them take it from you again. Tears burned her eyes, but before she could respond, he kissed her, nothing like the chaste brush of lips at their courthouse wedding. This kiss was fierce, desperate, unguarded. It spoke of all the walls he had built, crumbling at once. When they broke apart, breathless, Celeste whispered, "This was supposed to be a month, a bet, nothing more." Nathaniel pressed his forehead to hers. "It was never just a bet, not anymore. I don't know when it happened, but I love you. And I don't care if we win or lose, I'm not letting you go." The words cut through her doubts like sunlight breaking a storm. For so long she had trusted no one, but now, for the first time, she believed she might not have to fight alone. The next day in court, the judge turned to Celeste directly. "Mrs. Hayes, I'd like to hear from you, in your own words. What is the nature of this marriage?" The gallery went silent. Every camera tilted toward her. Every lawyer leaned forward, ready to pounce. Celeste rose slowly, her heart pounding, but her voice steady as it carried through the hushed room. "Our marriage began as an arrangement, yes. I won't lie about that, but what it has become is something neither of us expected. In Nathaniel, I found not just a husband, but a partner, someone who sees me for who I am, not who I was or what I've lost. My grandfather wanted me to find someone who would stand by me, fight with me, and value me beyond money. That's what I found. And no lawsuit, no smear campaign, no bet can take that away." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even some of the opposing lawyers shifted uncomfortably. The judge's expression was unreadable. "Very well," she said. "We will hear Mr. Hayes' testimony tomorrow." Celeste sat down, her pulse thundering. Tomorrow, one more day to decide their future. And in the shadows of the courtroom, Vanessa Knight sat with folded arms, her smile sharp as glass. She wasn't finished. Not yet. The courtroom on the final day was overflowing, every bench filled, reporters lined against the walls, camera crews waiting outside as though history itself were on trial. The buzz of whispered speculation ran like static through the gallery. Some believed Celeste would lose everything. Others thought the spectacle had already immortalized her as a kind of modern-day phoenix. But for Celeste, as she sat beside Nathaniel with her fingers clenched tightly around his, all the noise dissolved into a single, thunderous thought. This is the moment everything changes. Judge Harrison, a stern woman with silver hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun, presided from the bench. Her eyes were sharp, her voice clipped. "We've heard the testimony from Mrs. Hayes," she said, her gavel tapping once for order. "Now we will hear from Mr. Nathaniel Hayes." Nathaniel rose slowly, buttoning his jacket. Every camera in the room clicked to life. Every reporter leaned forward, pens poised. He stepped into the witness box and swore the oath with a steady voice. But when he began to speak, it wasn't with the cold, precise tone of a businessman. It was with the fire of a man who had nothing left to hide. "Yes, our marriage began with a bet," he admitted openly, his voice ringing through the courtroom. Gasps erupted, journalists scribbling furiously, but Nathaniel didn't falter. "I accepted Vanessa Knight's challenge because she had home. She accused me of being incapable of love, of being nothing more than ambition in a suit. I thought I could prove her wrong by marrying someone outside my world. I thought it would be a performance." He turned then, his steel-gray eyes finding Celeste's across the courtroom. The walls around him, the pride, the image, the empire, seemed to fall away. But the moment I met Celeste, the moment I saw her dignity in the face of despair, I knew this was no performance. She had nothing to gain from me and every reason to walk away, but she stayed. And in that time, I've fallen in love with her strength, her integrity, her ability to see beyond wealth and power. If she lost every penny tomorrow, it would not change what she means to me. She is my wife, not because of a will, not because of a wager, but because she is the one person who sees me. Not the billionaire, not the empire, but me. The gallery was silent. Even the relentless scratching of pens had stopped. For a moment, Celeste forgot they were surrounded by hundreds of eyes. It was just him, speaking to her with the honesty she had once thought him incapable of. Then, a movement in the gallery broke the spell. Vanessa Knight stood, her black dress sharp as a blade against the pale wood benches. "Your Honor," she called, her voice slicing through the silence, "I have evidence that proves this marriage is a fraud." The room erupted into chaos. Judge Harrison's gavel slammed against the bench. "Order! Ms. Knight, you are not counsel in this matter." Vanessa ignored her, producing a sleek tablet from her purse. "I hired a private investigator. He obtained recordings of Mr. Hayes admitting to friends that this was a sham, that it was all to win a bet. This entire union is built on deception." The opposing lawyers seized the moment like sharks scenting blood. "Your Honor, if such evidence exists, it is critical to establish lynching fraud," one cried. Celeste felt her stomach drop. Her worst fear, proof twisted, manipulated, used to destroy them. She turned to Nathaniel, but he stood firm, his jaw set like granite. "Your Honor," Nathaniel said, his voice calm but laced with steel. "Vanessa Knight has manipulated events from the beginning. She instigated this bet. If she now claims to have recordings, let them be reviewed in full context. I have nothing to hide." The judge's gaze was cold as she motioned for the bailiff to retrieve the tablet. The audio played, Vanessa's voice smug in the background, Nathaniel's voice clipped. "It's just a bet. A month of marriage to prove her wrong." The gallery gasped again. Celeste's chest constricted. On the surface, it sounded damning. But then the recording continued, Vanessa's laughter faint and Nathaniel's voice grew louder. "But what began as a bet has become something I didn't expect, something real, and I will never let her humiliate Celeste for the sake of pride." Silence. The truth had been hidden in Vanessa's selective edit, her attempt to twist words into a weapon, now played in full. It was her own undoing. Judge Harrison's eyes narrowed. "Ms. Knight, this court does not tolerate manipulation. You are hereby ordered removed from these proceedings." The bailiff moved toward her, but Vanessa stood frozen, her face ashen, her perfect mask shattered. Celeste felt a rush of relief so sharp it brought tears to her eyes. Nathaniel had laid everything bare, and somehow, in his vulnerability, he had turned the tide. The judge reviewed the documents, her expression unreadable as the courtroom held its collective breath. Finally, she spoke. "This court finds that Mrs. Celeste Hayes is the legitimate heir to the Ashworth estate. The marriage, while unconventional in origin, has proven itself genuine in spirit and practice. The conditions of the will are satisfied. All Ashworth assets are to be restored to Mrs. Hayes immediately." The room exploded into sound, cheers, flashes, reporters shouting questions. Celeste sagged against the table, her hand flying to her mouth, overwhelmed. Nathaniel was there instantly, pulling her into his arms, holding her as if she were the only person who mattered. "Furthermore," Judge Harrison continued over the uproar, "this court admonishes those who sought to exploit Ms. Hayes' circumstances for financial gain. Legal costs are to be borne by the challengers along with damages. But Celeste barely heard. All she felt was Nathaniel's arms, his voice whispering against her ear. It's over. We won. 6 months later, the headquarters of the newly reformed Ashworth Industries buzzed with life. The building, once silent, had been reborn under Celeste's leadership. Its focus shifted to sustainable innovation and ethical growth. Nathaniel entered her office carrying a bouquet of lilies, the same kind she had been arranging the day they met. For the most beautiful CEO in New York, he teased, offering them with a theatrical bow. Celeste laughed, setting aside the reports she had been reading. Flatterer. True, he corrected, leaning down to kiss her. They left together for the evening's gala, the first anniversary of the Ashworth Hayes Foundation. The same ballroom where the bet had been struck now glittered with celebration. But this time, there was no wager, no masks, no doubts. On stage, Nathaniel addressed the crowd. 1 year ago, I made a reckless bet. I thought I had everything, but I had nothing until I found Celeste. Celeste joined him, radiant in sapphire silk, her voice carried with quiet strength. I once lived unseen on the streets, forgotten by the world. Tonight, I stand here not just as someone who inherited wealth, but as someone who found that true riches come from the lives we touch and the love we dare to believe in. The applause thundered, but for Nathaniel and Celeste, the world had fallen away. He leaned close, whispering where only she could hear. I love you, Mrs. Hayes. Her eyes shimmered as she whispered back, I love you too, bet or no bet. And in that moment, they both knew the gamble that began in arrogance had ended in something no fortune could buy. A love fierce enough to withstand betrayal, scandal, and ruin, and powerful enough to change both their worlds forever.